Theo Cranebridge had always imagined his life as a peaceful escape from the noise and disorder of the city. When he purchased the 15-acre farmstead on the outskirts of a picturesque suburban town, he envisioned quiet mornings with coffee in hand, surveying his land, tending to crops, and perhaps even raising chickens. The old farmhouse had charm. The sprawling fields offered a sense of liberation. And most importantly, the property was his land, his rules. Or so he thought. It took exactly 1 week for that illusion to be destroyed. One morning, while collecting his mail, Theo noticed a thick envelope stuffed into his mailbox, the kind that immediately screamed bureaucratic. The return address read, Lakeside Paradise Homeowner Association, a name he had heard in passing from the locals, but had paid little attention to. Homeowner Association. That had nothing to do with him. His farm had existed long before the development of the secured community down the road. He had checked the property records before buying the land. His farm was not within their authority, and yet the envelope was addressed to him. Curious, he tore it open and began reading. Notice of violation. Outstanding fines. $2,23,481. 19. Dry laugh, as if the absurdity of the situation would somehow cause reality to correct itself. The homeowner association had absolutely no control over his farm. He was certain of that. He tossed the letter aside, assuming this was simply a mix-up that would resolve itself. That assumption lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, Theo was about to start renovations on the farmhouse's aging porch when he noticed a black SUV pulling into his driveway. The doors swung open in perfect synchronization, revealing 4 figures in business casual attire, armed with clipboards and a sense of authority. At the front of the group stood a woman in her mid-40s, her blonde bob so precisely styled it looked carved from stone, her beige slacks so aggressively pressed that they could probably slice through paper. She approached him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Cranebridge, I presume? Theo raised an eyebrow. That depends. You a tax collector? The woman let out a short, humorless laugh. Karen Watson, president of the Lakeside Paradise Homeowner Association. I believe you received our notice. Yeah, Theo said, crossing his arms. I also believe it's a mistake. My property isn't in your homeowner association. Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. She gestured toward one of her clipboard-carrying assistants, who promptly pulled out a large, laminated map and handed it to Theo. His gaze swept over it, and he felt an immediate surge of frustration. The homeowner association had redrawn its boundary lines. His farm, which had always been separate, was now conveniently enclosed within their control. You'll see here, Karen continued, tapping a manicured nail against the map, that as of last month your property now falls under Lakeside Paradise's regulatory oversight. The prior owner neglected to bring the property up to our standards, so we are legally entitled to pursue enforcement that includes collecting unpaid dues and ensuring compliance with our rules. Theo stared at her, then back at the map, then back at her again. You people just decided my farm is part of your little regime now? He asked, voice laced with incredulity and amusement. Karen's expression twitched ever so slightly at his choice of words, but she recovered quickly. Community standards are important, Mr. Cranebridge. We all want to maintain property values and preserve a unified appearance. Theo snorted. Lady, I own a farm. What? You want me to replace my barn with a matching beige mansion? Karen's smile was beginning to strain. There are options to help integrate your property in a way that complements the neighborhood. Of course. First, the outstanding fines must be settled. Theo folded his arms. I'm not paying a single cent, and if you or your gang of clipboard-carrying enforcers set foot on my land again, I'm calling the sheriff. For the first time, Karen's polite mask cracked, revealing a flicker of annoyance, maybe even anger. But she wasn't going to let him win that easily. This isn't a debate, Mr. Cranebridge, she said, voice clipped. We expect full compliance within the next 30 days. Otherwise, lawsuits will be taken. Theo took a step forward, closing the gap between them. His 6'2" frame and broad shoulders cast a shadow over her. "You can expect to get laughed out of court," he said smoothly. "Now, if you don't mind, I've got a porch to fix. Unlike you, I actually do my own repairs." Karen inhaled sharply, clearly unused to being dismissed so effortlessly. With an air of cold determination, she turned on her heel and marched back toward her SUV. "You'll regret this," she said over her shoulder. "Homeowner Association always wins in the end." Theo watched as the SUV pulled out of his driveway and sped off down the dirt road toward the pristine Homeowner Association-controlled suburb. He sighed, shaking his head. "Lady," he muttered to himself, "I faced tax inspectors, 2 ex-wives and a bear that once tried to break into my truck. You're going to have to try harder than that." But something told him Karen Watson was just getting started. The following morning, Theo stepped onto his porch, expecting nothing more than a quiet day of work on the farm. Instead, he found himself greeted by an official-looking red notice stapled to his barn door. He narrowed his eyes and walked over, ripping it off to read notice of code violation. Structure deemed unsafe. Mandatory removal required within 14 days. Theo let out a humorless laugh. So this was Karen's first move. The woman had left his property barely 24 hours ago, and she was already trying to declare his barn a public danger. He had expected pettiness, but this was impressively fast work. Before he could even process how ridiculous the claim was, an unfamiliar white truck pulled onto his driveway. A man in a city inspector's uniform climbed out, clipboard in hand, looking like he had better things to do. "You must be Mr. Cranebridge," the man said, adjusting his hat. "I'm here on behalf of the County Code Enforcement Office. We received multiple complaints about unsafe structures on this property." Theo exhaled slowly. "Let me guess. Lakeside Paradise Homeowner Association?" The inspector blinked, clearly surprised that Theo had already figured it out. He coughed into his hand. "I can't disclose the origin of the complaint," Theo smirked. "Buddy, you just did." The man hesitated, then flipped through his notes. "Regardless, I need to conduct an inspection." "Fine," Theo said, gesturing toward the barn. "Let's take a look." For the next 20 minutes, Theo led the inspector through every inch of the barn. The foundation was solid. The roof had been recently repaired, and aside from a few areas needing minor repairs, nothing even remotely justified a demolition order. The inspector scratched his head, clearly perplexed. "Look, I don't see any real issues here," the man finally admitted. "But since the Homeowner Association submitted a formal complaint, I'll need to file an official assessment." Theo sighed. "And in the meantime, you'll probably keep getting notices." Great. So Karen was going to play the overwhelm him in paperwork strategy. Theo was many things, but helpless wasn't one of them. If the Homeowner Association wanted to harass him with bogus citations, he would make sure everyone knew about it. That night, he recorded a video standing in front of the barn with the county inspector's report in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of When the Homeowner Association Loses Its Sanity." He held up the violation notice. "This is what Lakeside Paradise Homeowner Association sent me today, claiming my barn is unsafe and needs to be torn down. Meanwhile, here's an official report from the county inspector confirming it's structurally stable." Theo walked up to the barn and kicked the wooden support beam for dramatic effect. The barn didn't so much as creak. "Looks pretty sturdy to me," he said dry. "I wonder if the real reason Homeowner Association wants it gone is because it ruins the appearance of their cookie-cutter mansions down the road." He ended the video with Karen Watson. "If you're watching this, let's play a game. You try to mess with me, I make sure everyone sees it. Let's see who gets exhausted first." Then he uploaded the video to every local community Facebook group, Nextdoor thread, and Homeowner Association horror story forum he could find. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the video had hundreds of comments, mostly from people sharing their own Homeowner Association horror stories. Even some residents from Lakeside Paradise chimed in, clearly frustrated with Karen's leadership. One user wrote, "They fined my grandmother for putting up Christmas lights that weren't pre-approved. Please expose them for us." Another added, Homeowner association tried to ban kids from using chalk on the sidewalks because it was vandalism. I fully support your war. And the best one yet, if Karen Watson disappears under mysterious circumstances. We all know it was a joint decision. Theo was feeling pretty good about himself until the next morning when he turned on his kitchen light and nothing happened. Confused, he checked his circuit breaker. Everything was fine. Then he went outside and saw two workers from the power company standing next to his electrical meter. "Something wrong here?" he asked, approaching. One of the workers gave him an apologetic look. "You're on a list for scheduled shutdown." Theo's eye twitched. "Excuse me, yeah?" Homeowner association reported an issue. "With your account said you needed an urgent inspection before service could be restored." Theo took a slow breath. "My account is up to date. My property isn't even in their homeowner association." The worker frowned. "That actually makes this strange. They shouldn't have the authority to do this." "Well, tell that to whoever gave them access," Theo muttered. Luckily, after some back and forth, Theo got his power restored. But now, he knew Karen was escalating. She had failed to use county code enforcement against him, so now she was trying to manipulate utility companies. Theo decided to go bigger. If Karen wanted to treat his farm like an homeowner association war zone, he'd make sure it was the most anti-homeowner association property in town. So, he rented a giant billboard on the main road leading into Lakeside Paradise. It read, "Welcome to the land of the free. No homeowner association. No nonsense." Underneath in smaller print, "Home, a Theodore Cranebridge harassed by homeowner association. Since day one, ask me how to fight back." The billboard immediately became the highlight of the town. People stopped him at the local hardware store to shake his hand. Nearby farmers honked in support whenever they drove past. Even some homeowner association members secretly sent him messages saying, "We're cheering for you." The next time Karen drove past, she visibly clenched her jaw when she saw the billboard. Theo, leaning against his truck, tipped his hat at her with a smirk. Her face turned red. She wasn't going to let this stand. This was now a battle. Theo had expected the fight with the homeowner association to be exhausting, but he hadn't expected it to become an endurance test of sheer nonsense. Every time he thought Karen had run out of ways to harass him, she found some new, complicated method to make his life harder. By now, he was convinced the woman had a dedicated committee brainstorming new ways to be a menace. That was when Bill Henderson entered the picture. Bill had been watching from the sidelines, quietly observing as Theo went to battle with the homeowner association. A retired attorney with over 40 years of experience, he had once been an esteemed member of Lakeside Paradise himself, until Karen took over. Back when Bill first moved into the neighborhood, the homeowner association had been a mild bother at worst, the kind of organization that sent out polite reminders about lawn maintenance and kept things running smoothly. But then Karen Watson staged a little takeover. She worked her way up the homeowner association board, systematically removing anyone who didn't align with her rigid, dictatorial agenda for the neighborhood. Bill, who had the nerve to suggest that homeowner association rules should be fair and reasonable, had been pushed out under the flimsiest of excuses. First, Karen had hit him with a series of fines for minor infractions. Then she blocked him from homeowner association meetings, claiming he was disruptive. Finally, she used a technical loophole to force his house into non-compliance, leading to a forced sale and eviction. Bill had never forgiven her, so when he saw Theo fighting back, really fighting back, he knew it was time to get involved. One evening, Theo was loading feed into the barn. When he heard the sound of a truck pulling up, he turned to see an older man in his late 60s, dressed in a worn flannel shirt and jeans, stepping out with a slow, deliberate confidence. "You must be the fella giving Karen an episode," Bill said. A knowing smirk tugging at his lips, Theo wiped his hands on his jeans. "That's the plan." "And you are?" Bill Henderson, former homeowner association member, former Lakeside Paradise resident, current pain in Karen Watson's existence. Theo grinned. "Now, that's an introduction I can appreciate. Bill pulled a thick folder from under his arm and handed it over. "I got something for you. Homeowner Association's real boundary lines. The ones that count in court, not the ones Karen pulled out of thin air." Theo flipped through the documents. They were official property records, stamped and notarized, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that his land had never legally been part of the homeowner association. Theo let out a slow whistle. "Where the hell did you get these?" Bill chuckled. "I was a lawyer before Karen made it her mission to ruin my life. I kept copies of everything when she pushed me out. Figured they might come in handy someday." Theo studied the old man for a moment. "So why now? You could have walked away from this whole problem." Bill's expression darkened. "Because Karen's gotten worse. She's not just running a neighborhood association anymore, she's running a goddamn dictatorship. People are afraid to stand up to her." Theo leaned against a fence post. "Not you, though," Bill smirked. "I don't have much to lose. And watching you infuriate her, that's the most fun I've had in years." Theo laughed. "Well, Bill, welcome to the resistance." And just like that, Karen Watson had a new problem on her hands. The cracks in Karen Watson's perfect homeowner association dictatorship had been forming for years. But now, thanks to Theo and Bill, they were beginning to split wide open. At first, Lakeside Paradise's residents had blindly followed Karen's rules, either out of intimidation or sheer exhaustion. It was easier to pay a small penalty than to fight back. Easier to repaint the mailbox than argue with the homeowner association board. But as Theo publicly exposed Karen's deception, people started questioning everything. The first real shift happened when a young mother, Lisa Carter, received a citation notice for her unacceptably tall front lawn. What the homeowner association failed to consider was that Lisa had been spending the past few weeks caring for her sick son and hadn't had time to mow. When she tried to explain, Karen simply doubled the fine and told her that community standards must be upheld. Lisa's frustration boiled over. She posted in the neighborhood group chat, venting about how she'd been fined for taking care of her child. Within minutes, other residents chimed in. "Karen fined my grandmother for using a wreath that wasn't homeowner association approved. She told my husband he couldn't park his truck in the driveway even though it's his only vehicle. Remember when she tried to shut down the neighborhood lemonade stand because it was unapproved commerce? And then the real bombshell. I just saw that billboard Theo put up outside the neighborhood. Maybe he's right about her." Karen noticed the shift immediately. She had built her authority on the assumption that residents would be too scared or passive to fight back. Now, for the first time, they were talking back. Her response? More fines, more warnings, more intimidation. But it didn't work. Theo's battle had emboldened them. The final breaking point came when Bill Henderson, former homeowner association member turned rebel advisor, released a shocking document to the neighborhood, a detailed report of how much money Karen had siphoned from homeowner association fees into her own projects, landscaping expenses for her personal property paid with homeowner association funds, private security cameras installed at her house, homeowner association fees, a lawsuit against a resident who once tried to sue her. Yep, paid by the homeowner association. Within 24 hours, the homeowner association board was in full panic mode. Members were resigning, others were gathering in front of Karen's house, demanding explanations. And from his porch, Theo watched it all unfold, grinning as he took a sip of his coffee. Theo had expected Karen to strike back, but even he was surprised by just how desperate she was willing to be. It started early in the morning, just as the sun peeked over the horizon. Theo was inside sipping coffee when the ground began to shake. At first, he thought it was a passing truck, but when the noise didn't fade, he stepped onto his porch and saw something that made his blood run cold. A bulldozer was rolling onto his property. Behind it, a convoy of construction trucks and hired workers, all in bright yellow vests, swarmed toward his barn. And standing at the front of it, all arms crossed, was Karen Watson. Theo didn't even hesitate. He grabbed his phone and hit record as he stormed down his steps. "Hey," he bellowed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen turned with the smugness of a villain. revealing their scheme. "Mr. Cranebridge," she called out, "your unauthorized structure has been scheduled for demolition per Lakeside Paradise's community regulations. You were warned." Theo's jaw clenched. "You are out of your mind. This is private property." Karen held up a folder of documents. "Actually, as of this week, your property is officially under homeowner association jurisdiction. You didn't respond to our notices, so we're handling it ourselves." Theo snatched the papers from her hands. His eyes darted across the legally riddled nonsense, then stopped on something that made his stomach turn. The homeowner association map had been altered again. His land had been fraudulently redrawn, showing it as part of Lakeside Paradise, with Karen's signature approving the change. "You falsified these," Theo said, his voice low and dangerous. Karen smirked. "That would be a serious allegation." She turned to the crew. "Gentlemen, proceed with the demolition." The bulldozer engine roared to life. Workers moved toward the barn, ready to take it apart. Theo had one chance to stop this before things got ugly. He hit a single button on his phone. "Emergency. This is Deputy Collins," came a voice from the speaker. "What's your situation?" "Yeah," Theo said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'd like to report trespassers, destruction of private property, and real estate fraud. Oh, and I've got the whole thing on video." Karen's grin wavered. One of the construction workers hesitated. "Wait, you called the cops?" "I called the cops," Theo confirmed, aiming his camera at Karen. "And guess what? They'll be very interested in these fake documents you're waving around." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned toward the bulldozer operator. "Keep going," she snapped. "This land is ours." But before the driver could move, the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning air. Within minutes, two sheriff's department vehicles skidded onto Theo's driveway. Deputy Collins stepped out firsthand, resting on his holstered gun as he assessed the scene. Theo waved him over, thrusting the forged documents into his hands. "This woman is trying to steal my land and destroy my barn. Check the signature. She forged the damn thing." Collins flipped through the papers, his brows knitting together. His gaze flicked to Karen. "Miss Watson," he said slowly, "there's a reason you're attempting to enforce homeowner association rules on a property that's not actually in your homeowner association." Karen lifted her chin. "The board approved an expansion. This land is." "That's not how real estate law works," Collins cut in, his voice laced with impatience. "You can't just redraw lines and expect it to hold up in court. Did you even file this with the county?" Karen hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and that was all Collins needed. "All right," he sighed, waving over to deputies. "Miss Watson, you're under arrest for fraud, trespassing, and attempted destruction of private land." The moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Karen finally lost it. "You can't do this," she screamed, struggling against the deputies. "I am the homeowner association president. I am the authority." Here Collins rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, you're going to want to save that for your lawyer." As they loaded Karen into the police cruiser, Theo stepped forward, arms crossed. "Homeowner association always wins, huh?" he mused. "Guess there's a first time for failure." The cops drove off. The construction workers quickly packed up and left, muttering amongst themselves. The bulldozer backed away from the barn untouched. Theo exhaled, running a hand through his hair. That had been way too close. But as he glanced toward his porch, he saw a few residents watching from the road, watching Karen be taken away, and some of them were grinning. Karen Watson's capture sent shock waves through Lakeside Paradise. For years, she had ruled the homeowner association with absolute power, enforcing her vision of a perfect community with an iron grip and an army of violation notices. But now she was sitting in a cell facing multiple criminal charges, and the once feared homeowner association board was scrambling like rats on a sinking ship. Theo had expected them to try and cover for her, to pretend nothing had happened, but he hadn't expected how quickly they turned on her the moment the news of her fraudulent scheme spread through the neighborhood board. Members started resigning one by one. "We had no idea what she was doing," they insisted, desperately trying to escape. But the residents of Lakeside Paradise weren't buying it. They had spent years under Karen's tyranny, years of fines, of absurd restrictions, of living in constant fear of her next command. And now, they were outraged. A spontaneous community meeting formed in the neighborhood's Central Park. Theo, invited as a guest of honor, leaned against a picnic table as resident after resident stepped forward with horror stories about Karen's rule. Lisa Carter counted her ridiculous lawn fine while caring for her sick child. The Millers described how Karen had tried to ban their holiday decorations. One elderly couple broke into tears, explaining how she had threatened to remove them over a minor paint issue. And then Bill Henderson stood up. The moment the old lawyer spoke, the crowd fell silent. Karen Watson didn't act alone, he said, voice steady and authoritative. She was enabled by a homeowner association board that let her abuse her power. And if we don't shut this homeowner association down for good, it's only a matter of time before another Karen takes her place. A whisper rippled through the crowd, and then someone yelled, "Dissolve the homeowner association." Then another, and just like that, the vote was cast. The Lakeside Paradise Homeowner Association was officially abolished. Theo exchanged a glance with Bill. It had taken months of fighting, but finally, they had prevailed. With Karen behind bars and the Homeowner Association officially dismantled, Lakeside Paradise breathed for the first time in years. The neighborhood, once strangled by regulations, finally belonged to its residents again. Theo could see it in the little things. Kids playing outside without fear of unauthorized noise violations, driveways lined with pickup trucks. Karen would have banned houses, painted in any color, their owners damn well pleased. The air just felt lighter. But Theo and Bill weren't stupid. They knew that power-hungry people like Karen didn't just disappear. They regrouped, planned, and waited for the right moment to return. And sure enough, 3 years later she tried. Fresh out of jail, Karen resurfaced under a new identity, attempting to revive the homeowner association under a different name. She whispered to the same old enforcers, tried to stir up talk of restoring control. But Theo and Bill, they had been waiting for her. The moment Karen made her first official move, Theo and Bill called an emergency town gathering. They laid everything bare. Her past crimes, her fraudulent schemes, the suffering she had inflicted. They reminded everyone of the freedom they had fought for. Karen never even made it past the first meeting. As she stormed away from the town hall, furious and defeated, Theo called after her, grinning, "Guess homeowner association doesn't always win." Huh? Karen. She never showed her face there again.